Good afternoon and welcome to the January 4th, 2020 Public Works Committee meeting. Now is time for roll call and determination of quorum.
Evans. Armstrong. Here. Roberts. Here. Stroman. Here. Modrick. A quorum is present.
Thank you very much. And now for adoption of the agenda.
So moved.
We have a motion by Councilwoman Armstrong and a second by Councilman Stroman. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Now it's time for general public comment. Excuse me, I'm out of breath. A time for members of the public to discuss or express concerns to the committee on any issue not limited to items on the agenda. Action will not be taken at the meeting on any issue not on the agenda except by placement on the agenda by unanimous vote of the council members present, and we don't have any general public comment, so I'll open and close it. And we'll move on to consent items, items 1 through 12. And I'll look for a motion.
To approve.
Dale Tech? Go ahead, Dale.
Items 11 and 12 need to be removed from the consent calendar.
Okay. So I'll look for a motion for items 1 through 10 unless somebody wants to pull one of those.
I was waiting for one of them to do that. I thought.
So we have a motion by Councilwoman Armstrong, a second by Councilman Evans. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. On to item 11. From Community Development, this is first reading and introduction of ordinance number 6310, an ordinance to update the tax increment financing district review process by amending chapter 3.26 of the Rapid City Municipal Code. And it looks like we have a speaker.
Mr. Chair, if we could take items 11 and 12 together.
Absolutely. No.
All right, well, we're getting that pulled up. I just want to thank you for the opportunity to present what we have here today on the tax increment financing policy. As you know, we've been working on this for quite some time. It's been about 2.5 years in earnest, but several years in practice of what we've been trying to look at, improve the situations, the entire review process of the tax increment financing applications, the certification of all of the expenses that go along with the process. So there have been several there have been several opportunities that we have given to the public, developers and bankers and other interested parties in the community to look at, assist us in the review, and to give us critique and responses. We have spent innumerable hours with other communities, including Sioux Falls, Aberdeen, and others to talk about how they do things. Sioux Falls came out and met with us and presented to the Planning Commission how they do their program. And so the Planning Commission has spent a lot of time. It's been to Planning Commission for review probably 6 or 7 times at least in a public hearing setting, and several changes to the proposed revisions have occurred through the process. What I feel that we have at this point in time is a very polished, refined proposal, and it has gone through, as mentioned, a lot of public review, and so I think what we have is a good product to present to you at this time. What we would like to, Patsy will be doing most of the presentation here, but we just wanted to point out a few things up front. Why did we feel that revisions were needed to begin with? We did identify a handful of reasons, and those are, one, that we needed to provide greater focus on promoting infill development, economic development, affordable housing, and transit-oriented development. Now, those last two were not initial goals that we were focusing on, but through the process, we did add affordable housing and transit-oriented development as components that we needed to strengthen. The other two, actually infill development and economic development, are strengthened through this proposal. To provide greater guidance to applicants in the application and certification processes, we found there was a lot of gaps and some misunderstanding as we have dealt with applicants through some of these processes. So we have come up with some guidelines, some criteria that have really tightened that up and help us to make it a cleaner, smoother, streamlined process for reviewing the application and to certify the actual costs. Also to improve and simplify staff efforts in the review of applications and certification processes. It's been very cumbersome, but we feel like we've tightened that up and made it an easier and better process. And also to ensure that TIF public financing tool is used responsibly and when determined necessary. In other words, that the project could not be built without TIF. And that is following the mandate of state code that tax increment financing must be a but-for type of a situation, that it would not happen unless the project could not happen without that assistance. So we wanted to make sure that we were actually promoting that in a good manner through this policy. So what are the benefits that we have come up with? Basically, they respond to those needs for revision that just mentioned, but I would like to just briefly again review those. An increased focus on infill development, economic development, affordable housing, and transit-oriented development. Greater guidance to applicants in the application and certification processes. Improved and simplified process for staff review certification, saving both time and expense, not just on the city side, but for the applicants as well. Assurance of necessity, use of the TIF public financing tool is both responsible and necessary. And 5, many opportunities that we've identified through this process for the use of TIF throughout the city without area restrictions. We had talked early on about having a greater focus on the core of the community. We have pulled back from that and decided that there was a lot of other opportunities that we should and could promote for economic development and affordable housing throughout the community. And so we have, through our process of review and criteria established, come up with a lot of opportunities wherein an application could receive the positive review points for being able to be approved and move forward. So with that, I'm here to answer questions, but I'm going to let Patsy take you through just a brief overview of what the policy revisions are.
I'm just going to go through these real quickly. Like Ken said, we've met with Aberdeen and Sioux Falls and reviewed our policy with them and made some comparisons, and some of the improvements that we have in our policy came specifically from those two communities. We've had over 10 public meetings the last 18 to 24 months. Those public comments and the frequently asked questions are provided on the website so that everybody has access to those. There are over 10, 12 pages of questions and answers provided. We've included the TIF chart within our policy so that everybody understands really how a TIF works and how the increment is, that portion in the orange area is used to pay off the capital costs and the interest associated project plan costs. And then the rest of it, the baseline property is still, those taxes that are generated still go to the existing taxing agencies even before the TIF was created. It's just the increment that is used for repayment. We wanted to make sure that was clarified. We've updated our verbiage throughout. We've defined specific base application requirements, and we added some evaluation criteria, which is totally new to this current proposal. Here's a list of the, here's a map of all of the districts, and one of the things that you see there, a huge majority, I'm guessing more than 75% of our existing TIFs and those TIFs that have been paid and dissolved are located on the fringes of our community. And what that does to the taxpayers and the city as a whole is we're spending infrastructure dollars on the outsides of our community instead of building up what we have in our existing core area. So we've got some targeted uses. Again, as Ken said, I'm not going to review those again. We've already talked about those. We're looking at both blight and economic development, so we've enhanced our definition to include those areas within the Elevate Rapid City economic development definitions that they were targeting at the time we put this together. Those are specifically healthcare and life sciences industries, research and financial and insurance industries, professional business services, metals manufacturing, and energy and small-scale food and beverage manufacturing. And those are specific from Elevate Rapid City or the previous economic development long-range plan that they had at the time. We're talking about both blight and affordable housing. We've identified that specifically. What is affordable housing? What is workforce housing? This is specific reference to the new regulations from South Dakota Housing Development Authority and the new TIF regulations adopted by the state, where they have an affordable housing criteria and they have those targeted numbers. Ours is more specific to our community based on the housing study that was adopted or that was completed a couple years ago. And then we've also identified the specific master plans, long-range plans that the community has adopted, and how is the new TIF application going to implement some more portions of several of those master plans, so that when we adopt a master plan, we're actually creating some tool and implementation process to go along with those master plans. We've looked at the infill and redevelopment. We've gone through that core community before, that's 1 and 2, and then our revitalization nodes and corridors that are also identified in our comprehensive plan. So here are some of the targeted transit-oriented development. We want to make sure that people have access to homes and new developments that are close to a transit stop that exists, so that they don't have to spend 30 to 40% of their income on transportation costs. Then we have a change in the project management. I know that that was a concern that has been expressed in the past. It's no longer a TIF committee itself, but similar to any other development application in our community, it's now done by staff, presented to Planning Commission, presented to the school and the county, so that they understand what's going on with our proposed TIFs. But we have a team that we're going to put together. We met with the applicant, we review the project, we work with an agreement, to try to get the best project that moves forward before it goes to Planning Commission. And that, similar to any other public improvement project, the city will manage that project as it goes through design and construction management. So here are some of the guiding principles. As in the existing policy, there is no guarantee of a TIF approval. It's only used as a necessity. We encourage a 10-year payoff to reduce those interest costs, but more importantly, to get the construction moving forward before the 5-year timeline hits, which is a state law requirement. We want to encourage our developers to get right after it once they get a TIF approved, not to wait 3 or 4 years and then start the construction. We've got the affordable housing in there, economic development information, and the tool that we're using. We want to address blight and excessive development costs, but we want to make sure that everybody complies with the regulations as well. As is in our existing policy, it is privately funded. The city, from my review, has not actually created many TIFs. There are a couple of them years ago, but they, generally it's the developer, and the developer funds it. We've got some references to how the construction valuations and the funding occurs, and how we want that determined when they submit their applications. One of the things that we've added is the taxation waiver restrictions. There are opportunities for developers to seek abatements or reimbursements based on some availability through state law, but when they get a TIF, we don't want them to sort of double dipping, so that we've got that tax waiver restriction in there. We are limiting the overlapping districts to no more than 2, so that both districts will pay off with no concern of the developer having to cover all those costs. We've got performance measures in there. And then similar to what we've done in the past, we are going to try to restrict some of the economic development grants. We want to make sure that, we're getting public infrastructure out of the tax increment districts. So then there are some revised eligibility costs. They are tied specifically to public infrastructure needs. The administrative fee has changed somewhat depending on the project plan itself. And then as necessary, we will work with the developer to refine some of those project costs. And again, the base requirements, we've somewhat talked about that, but there is a requirement that we determined that it is necessary for the TIF, that they can't actually move forward with the development without public assistance. We have the ability for financial feasibility and a fiscal impact from a third-party reviewer. We're going to look more closely at the cost projections using a 2-year average for those cost projections. We have the market analysis if necessary, and then, of course, the legal review. And then one of the things that has been, that our community has commented on is, the new evaluation criteria, and that, it's just going to be difficult to make any application move forward. But with this proposal, there are several ways that you can acquire points on the evaluation criteria, and it's a minimum of 10 points out of 28 possible. And if it exceeds a 10-year timeline on the proposal, then it requires a 12-point minimum. But generally, points are easily acquired through the evaluation process. What the evaluation criteria does, it reduces and or eliminates actual potential public hazards. So is there blight? Is there a crime issue that we're trying to address in some of the areas? Are we demolishing, some structures that are potentially substandard so that we can create newer, better tax-generating structures? And then I'm not going to read through the list, but generally, a point for each of these things. Does it involve a new startup company? Are we expanding existing businesses? Are we getting new jobs, new employment based on those targeted industries? And then are we getting affordable workforce housing units? Just going to highlight some of these. We want to make sure that the proceeds are just for the construction of public improvements that are not required as part of our existing subdivision regulation. Does it involve the redevelopment of blighted property? And then we have some tools in there on how we can actually determine what blight is. We have a definition for Rapid City, and I'll let you look at that. I'm not going to go through that. And then we also specifically identified a certification process. One of the things that we've found is that, with the time delay on certification, generally right now you have to have your project constructed. If you're not tracking your records and you're not, providing a very good accounting system for what you've gotten done, it's really hard to come back and request and provide copies of documentation necessary for, a potential audit. For example, our finance office requires receipts for everything. This is no different. If we have no receipt, we can't really pay for it. So what we do is we allow the developer time to try to find those receipts, and it takes a long time sometimes when it's a 5, 6, 7-year delay in starting construction and trying to certify. So we've got a checklist now that we have available. We've got more specific information that we're providing up front so that they can start working on collecting that documentation at the beginning of a tax increment district, not at the very end. And so then we're back to, the benefits of why we're revising the policy. But generally with that, I know that there have been some questions about and concerns about providing affordable housing and what it's going to take. So I did some general calculations on one subdivision. You can't really see this very well, but this is a subdivision that was submitted some time ago. They were proposing to construct $160,000 to $225,000 homes with an average about $200,000 in purchase price. And so I calculated some affordability requirements that would be associated with using public assistance for this particular subdivision. Phase 1, they were going to construct 25 homes. Phase 2, 26, Phase 3, 26, and then Phase 4 was another 25 single-family homes. So that created 102 single-family homes. 32 of those would have to be affordable. 4 of those would have to meet the 30% or below area median income. And so then there was also some multifamily on this particular subdivision, and there were not quite 6 acres of multifamily units that were going to be identified. That calculates to about 90 multifamily units. 27 of those would have to be affordable, and 2 would have to meet that 30% requirement. And so we've got a housing task force working on some things, and they put together this really convenient chart that I don't know that they're complete with, but it was a great tool. And so what I did is I took some census information and identified how many persons would meet that under $20,000 household income. In our community, based on that 5-year census data, there are 5,500 households that make under $25,000. There are just over 5,000 households that make between $20,000 and $35,000. And the number I'm referencing is written in because that's the census data. I plagiarized their particular document. For those folks that make $35,000 to $50,000, there are just over 4,600 households. And for those folks that make $50,000 to $75,000, there are just under 55 households. So these are the folks that were working on affordable housing for the 0 to 50% area median income, which is what AMI stands for. And then the workforce housing is the 50 to 75, 35 to 75,000 households that make fit in that 50 to 120% of our AMI. And I looked just recently, our 2019 area median income for the Rapid City area is $67,500. So these numbers associate with those percentages that Housing and Urban Development uses for the various groupings of their affordability calculations. But that's just another piece of information of concern that we've heard in the community on, why are we requiring affordable housing in our existing TIF policy? And it was in there before. We just enhanced it with some specific definitions so that you could see, how this would work out. But with that, Planning Commission did recommend approval, and we do, staff does as well.
Thank you, Patsy. Do we have any questions from the dais? If not,
If I may, before
Yes.
you move on to that, my hope is that in this session, which could be considered more of a work session and may become more so in the future, that if there are indeed questions, that we be able to handle those at this meeting and not have to wait until the city council meeting. Of course, we would like to answer questions at that point as well. However, if there's anything that we can address or prepare for, that is why we're here doing this today.
thank you very much. So we have Councilwoman Armstrong in the queue now. You have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I do just have some questions. This is not my area of expertise, and I will rely on legal and developer overviews. But the things that jump out to me, first and foremost, I'm very supportive of revising the TIF process, and I think I've been pretty supportive over that. There's no appeals process, correct?
That's not true.
Oh, okay. Explain that to me then, please.
For the evaluation chart, there is an appeal process for that. However, state law requires that Planning Commission approve creating the district. If Planning Commission doesn't approve creating the district, then they need to resubmit. But that's a state law requirement.
Okay, because we know that things are not very black and white. There are a lot of gray areas.
Correct.
So that was a concern to me. If somebody is reviewing this checklist that we have, that numeric, they have to get 25 or
10 out of 28.
10 out of 25.
8.
All right, so do we have one person reviewing that will just do just the checklist for consistency? My concern is if we have one project and we had two separate people reviewing it, they might come up with different numerical outcomes.
So you're correct. That's why we have the full team. The applicant actually, with the application, will score their application themselves as well. And then the TIF review team, which is made up of 7 or 8 people that was listed up there, they will also score it. And if it's close, we'll work with the applicant to adjust their proposal so that we can get the best proposal moving forward.
Okay. And then I saw a slide that said limited economic impact projects. What does that mean?
We're looking for something that, generates the best bang for our buck. And if it's questionable, we're trying to work with them to make it a better proposal than just, minimal increases in
So limited
benefits.
per year? I'm just a little confused about that verbiage.
I think it was in reference to economic development grants.
Yes.
Yeah, it was the grants. State law allows the community to provide grants to individuals. We want to somewhat restrict those applications because we're still looking for the public infrastructure. We know that in our community, it's expensive to construct our infrastructure. So instead of just asking for a grant where we're not getting really any public infrastructure, really the benefit is, say for example, keeping a multi-million-dollar company here in town with, the ability to provide a higher pay than some companies. We want to try to encourage more public infrastructure instead of just providing grants, to.
Okay. And one more question. What would be the incentive for somebody to do a TIF?
It's public assistance. It gives them the ability to fill in those funding gaps that, the project is good, but there's not quite enough return for their benefit. It's just a way to get one more small source of funding that generally is guaranteed by the taxpayers, not
Invest in your community.
invest in your community.
Okay, that's what I was looking for. Okay, thank you. I yield.
Thank you very much. Nobody else is in the queue. If you don't mind, can I ask just a couple of questions? Thank you very much. So you cannot use any other grants or public assistance with the TIF now? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm talking, asking for rebates because, it's really property tax rebates.
Okay.
I know that there is the option potentially of requesting from the county a tax rebate for apartment structures.
Yes.
Well, if you're requesting a tax abatement for apartment structures within a TIF, you're reducing the payoff ability because you're not getting as many taxes forwarded, because you're not paying as many.
Absolutely. So this has nothing to do with federal grants, state
no.
grants?
Heck
Okay.
no.
I had a little concern there because we're going to be bringing forward a low-income apartment complex here soon. We got the funding, the state and the federal funding for it in December. Of course, we're not asking for any TIF on it because it's a small project. It's only 36 units, but we're looking at a 200 to 300 unit one, and that will completely change because if we do something on that size, we're going to probably have to come forward with a TIF on it because we're going to have to do it somewhere that probably doesn't have infrastructure yet. So I did have a little concern over that. I do have a little concern, too, about how do you recommend a 10-year payoff? How does that work in there?
Well, it's part of the projections that you have. It's really a 10-year payoff. We have a couple of them that were approved just recently that the developer committed to a 10-year payoff. That means that he gets right after it, he or she gets right after the construction, the design is nearly done, they move forward, getting all of the improvements in so that the revenues are generated sooner. Really, the key is to get the improvements done, get the development moving forward, to get the tax revenues generating
No,
more
absolutely.
sooner rather than,
Absolutely.
15 years.
I totally understand that. But what happens if we have a downturn in the economy? What happens if the interest rates balloon? What happens if, all of those things can be pretty problematic, especially in real estate and in development. We don't know from day to day what's going to happen with interest rates right now.
The 10-year really gives you an extra point in the evaluation process. And what we've seen in the past is, if the downturn does happen, we can come in and amend the plan to allow a longer time period if the time period was in the agreement.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any other questions on the dais? Mr. Stroman, you have the...
Thank you. How do you measure the success of the use of TIFs, or like for the last 10 years? What's the measure to see if it's been a good thing in general?
I think if you're able to pay it off within the projected time frame and you have more than sufficient increase through the development because of the increased valuation, I think that right there is the most obvious.
And so using that measure, how have we done in the last 10 years with that? I mean, do you have like a evaluation of how this process has worked and whether it's something that we want to continue as we have, or whether there are some tweaks that need to be made to it?
I think some of the tweaks that we're making will assist us in, creating the best product possible. I know that there are some districts that paid off in less than 10 years. I know that there are a couple on the books that potentially are not going to pay off in 20 years. But that's, the one that I'm talking about that, has a large balance that will come forward is because that the project, the development didn't occur until, 7, 8 years after the infrastructure was in place, but the development itself to repay back that infrastructure wasn't constructed soon enough to get enough revenues moving forward. So that's why we're encouraging a shorter timeline to get that infrastructure in so that the development can occur and that the property tax increment is coming in.
So a lot of these benefits that we're proposing through this new revised policy will be realized because of some of the principles that we're putting into the policy, which are that we're improving the entire application process, that we assist them greater with more information and assistance in preparing their application than in the review of the application. That has really been improved, that entire process through this policy. Also the certification, there's going to be a much greater guidance in what is certifiable, and the whole process of submitting and certifying has been tightened up and improved through this revised policy.
Okay, thanks.
I don't see anyone else with any questions. If I don't, I'll look for a motion. I have a motion to approve from Alderwoman Armstrong. And no second? Oh, it's going to die. How about a motion to just bring it forward without
That's
recommendation?
exactly what I was going to do. May I respectfully revise that?
You may.
Move it to our next city council meeting on Tuesday.
It wouldn't have mattered. I'd have voted no against it anyway, so it would have been on the consent. But whatever, if I get a second. So we have a motion from Armstrong and a second from Councilman Evans to move this to council without recommendation? Absolutely.
My only concern is that we get the documents a few days before the meeting, and I've tried to study them thoroughly. A couple things I looked for, I haven't found yet, and I'm not necessarily opposed to anything, and I really appreciate the fact that Ms. Horton has included so much of this correspondence and everything. It's really obvious that everybody's been trying to be inclusive in this process and development of this policy. I do just want to say, though, this is, to those of us that don't do this on a day-to-day basis, it gets a little bit confusing and wordy. And so it's a matter of just information retrieval and study, so we actually know what we're endorsing rather than just rubber stamping it, because we are the last line of defense between what goes on here and the voters that think we're taking care of them. And I want to be able to say, you know, I really thoroughly reviewed this, and I know what I'm voting on, and I can assure you this is good for you, and it's good for the city. I did have one comment about the word necessity and how it's being used in some of these proposals. It doesn't really say whose needs are being met. For instance, is it the need of the developer to make a process happen that will, you know, correspondingly result sometime in future tax revenues? Or is it a need that we have as a city that's not being addressed in any other way, and we go forward to a developer and say, could you do this for us, because we can't seem to make this happen? And I just want to make sure that that can be accommodated in both cases, both
Get them
forms of
both together, so
necessity.
we'll
So,
just take them both.
thank you.
Please reach out to us if there's any concerns or questions that we can assist with.
And if nobody else has, I do want to clarify that we took 11 and 12 together, so we will be voting on both of them at the same time. Okay? All in favor? All opposed? Motion passes. Yes, that is to send it to council without recommendations, so it will be on non-consent. So that's the end of the consent calendar. We will go on to the non-consent items 13 and 14. I will open public comment. I do have a speaker request from Jim Semler on item 13. Unless you don't want to, are you just here for questions? Okay, so we have Mr. Semler and Mr. Davies. If you would please give us your name and your address for the record.
My name is Ron Davis, Davis Engineering, 1060 Kings Road, Rapid City.
And you have the podium if you want to speak about this, or if you're just there for questions, we will ask any questions if we have any.
Yeah, we're basically here for questions. We're requesting a non-requirement to put a sidewalk in on Deadwood Avenue, and the submittal that we gave the city shows that there are no sidewalks on Deadwood Avenue, basically the full length of Deadwood Avenue. This particular lot is like 200 or 300 feet of frontage on Deadwood Avenue, and it's asphalted the full length of the property. So basically, there's an asphalt sidewalk there for people to walk on anyway. So we're just trying to request not to have to tear that out and put another sidewalk in at this point in time. The Bargain Barn Tire is trying to build a dry storage building to put their tires and stuff in. That's all they're doing. There's no major change except a building to put their stuff in that's sitting outside now. So that's what the project is.
Thank you very much. So I will close public comment because we have no one else. And I will go to item 13, request from Semler Construction for variance to waive the requirement to install sidewalk along Deadwood Avenue, Rapid City per ordinance 12.08.060. And this was denied by staff, so I will open this up. Mr. Evans, you have the floor.
We've come up with one of these problems approximately every other Public Works and every other council meeting since I've been on in July.
I'm aware of that.
And we seem to be addressing problems that are legacy issues. I'm of the mindset that we shouldn't start haphazardly enforcing things that in any way punish certain, property owners and really don't accomplish anything. So I'm going to vote to give you the variance, but I'm going to propose that we come up as a city with our design manual or whatever it is that specifies these things to have a way of giving you a variance, and in 6 months when the guy next to you wants a variance and the guy on the other side wants a variance, similar to what happened down in the Coca-Cola thing a month ago, that we have this. Okay, this is a variance with some sort of stipulation, and we understand that when 3 property owners or whatever, all in a row, they've reached that tipping point, and then you all have to put in the sidewalk. So we get something accomplished, because we're never going to go back and fix all of these ills for the last 50 years of people driving up Deadwood Avenue and walking in the street or the parking lot by having you put in that sidewalk. Because we don't know if it's going to be another 50 years for the person on either side of you that wants to do it. But I think we do have to have some kind of policy and some kind of process for making it happen when the time comes around. So I'm going to vote to give you the variance, but I'm going to propose that we, as a city, come up with a policy that marks that as having a variance, and something will kick in if adjacent property owners or something, and we need to rewrite that in such a way that that happens, so we can actually get something accomplished that we're trying to all get done. Because I don't like the lack of sidewalk either, but I don't see as making him build one's going to solve any problem at this stage of the game. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Evans. Now, Councilman Stroman, you have the floor.
Thank you. Sir, where is this storage building going to be located? Is it going to be behind the bargain barn?
Did you get any of the submittal that we gave to the city, the site plan and all that?
Yeah.
Does that come to the, is it on the screen, or? It's just south of the existing building, almost attached to it, just on the very south side of it.
Okay. And
Where are you at there?
yeah, we're
it's-
talking up here, right? This is the bargain barn?
Yeah, there you go, yeah.
And so you're going to be just south of it right here?
Yeah, well, it's going to be on the same property, just
Oh,
next
okay.
to the existing building.
And is this 200 to 300 feet of asphalt paving, is that going to be in front of this part of the building also, or this building also?
Too bad you can't blow that up or have a better site plan.
Well, maybe we could go to the photo, well, the street view kind of helps a little bit.
Basically, it's a long lot. In front of the building is a landscaping area next to Deadwood Avenue, and then that's paved from there back to the existing building, 30, 40, 50 feet, something like that. And then this building will be adjacent to and south of the existing building, so it'll have asphalt all the way up to the street also. So I don't think it's the best I can describe it
Can
without a detail.
we get the photo up of the street view photo that was also attached? I have a question about that. I don't know if... Is Daryl back there?
Is there some way just to blow up that portion?
Okay. Okay, but in any event, this entire frontage from the north end to the south end is all asphalt, correct?
That's correct. On the frontage, it's on Deadwood Avenue. You were pointing to the right a little bit, which is the very north end of the property.
Right.
But that comes down and jogs to the east towards Deadwood Avenue. So that frontage from the lower corner there to the south corner is all asphalt, with a landscape island in front of it there, or beside of it.
Yeah, that's just like a rock fill.
Yeah, it's just a curb and gutter with rocks and plants, yeah, landscape. So if they did walk down along there, they would walk behind that, which is away from the traffic. It's actually behind the landscape instead of...
Yeah, there's a place to walk without walking on Deadwood Avenue.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
A place for pedestrian traffic.
Yes.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Mr. Roberts had his step away. I have a question. Sure, you can ask it. Mr. Tech, your, was it yours? Sorry, my notes. Your staff denied this. Can you explain that?
Yeah, certainly. There's, on any given month, there are a number of exceptions for sidewalk that are requested. Staff evaluates each and every one of them. Certainly if there are grade issues or some sort of physical impossibility to improve or install sidewalk, you will see those items as a consent item on Public Works Committee to recommend approval of waiving that requirement. In this instance, there are no such issues. Staff really has no choice but to recommend denial of the request to not install sidewalk. Mr. Evans has stated that we need some sort of a policy. We do have a policy. That's what's in city ordinance right now. And the intent of that policy is if you make improvements to a building, you install sidewalks. Eventually, all the sidewalks will get in place. I'll also remind the City Council that you have the power. You have the power to order in sidewalk wherever you would like in this community. We've studied this issue on Deadwood Avenue numerous times. Staff has a recommendation in the past to have sidewalks installed all the way up and down Deadwood Avenue. At that time, the City Council chose not to. So that's where we're at today.
Is it true that even though there is something there, they've got to dig that up and replace it with a brand-new one?
Correct. You've got an asphalt parking lot. When it snows, do they go out and shovel the parking lot so people can walk? So it comes down to walkability and maintenance. If you look at, you can't see the overhead picture, but there are a number of vehicles parked on that asphalt. It's a parking area and a circulation area for the business as well. So to say that it's okay for pedestrians to be there, yeah, that may work, but there's also a conflict with vehicular traffic, and that's why a designated sidewalk is the correct answer.
Thank you for clarifying that. I yield.
Thank you. And Councilman Evans, you have the floor again.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that my statement isn't misconstrued. I understand we have a policy, and I don't disagree with that policy, but I also know that the intent of the policy is to create a safe walking environment for pedestrians. I don't see as this accomplishes that, and that's the reason I'm opposed to it in this particular case. And I suggest that anybody who disagrees with what I'm saying now, go up and start walking in one of these businesses. I spent a lot of time up there because my dad used to work in one of those places for about 40 years. And I know what it's like to walk along there, and I don't see that putting in that one swath of sidewalk is going to accomplish our goal of making it a more safe pedestrian passage. So I just want to make sure my comments are not misconstrued. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Evans. And do we have a motion on the floor? Okay, to approve, not deny, to approve the variance. So we have a motion by Councilman Evans and a second by Councilman Stroman to approve the variance. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Item 14.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Item 14, appeal by FIS Land Surveying and Consulting Engineers Incorporated of an exception request denial to waive, defer the requirement to pay proposed subdivision streets until a road district is created and funds accumulated.
Mr. Chair.
Absolutely, you can make that motion. Second. We have a motion to postpone this to the next Public Works meeting, which would be, does anybody have a calendar? January 28th. And the motion by Councilman Stroman, the second by Councilwoman Armstrong. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion passes.
Motion to adjourn.
Have a motion to adjourn? Second. And a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Good meeting, and thank you very much.